Sentire Media.
In the spring of 1919, the General Inspector of Public Safety, Giovanni Gasti, handed in the report he had been compiling on the man he had been following, Benito Andrea Amilcare Mussolini. Benito Mussolini is of strong constitution, although he suffers from syphilis. This strong constitution allows him a strenuous work schedule. He rests at home until late in the morning. He goes out around midday, but he does not come back until 3 o'clock in the morning, and these 15 hours, with brief pauses for meals, are dedicated to the activity of journalism and politics. He is a sensual man, and this is demonstrated by the many relations he has with various women. He is emotional and impulsive. These characteristics make him suggestive and persuasive in his speeches. Although he speaks well, we cannot really define him as an orator. He is, deep down, a sentimental man, and this wins him many sympathies and friendships. He is disinterested, generous, and this has given him a reputation of altruism and philanthropy. He is very intelligent, careful, measured, and thoughtful, with a good knowledge of men, of their qualities and their defects. He is quick to like or dislike, capable of sacrifice for his friends. He is persistent against his enemies and in his hatreds. He is brave and audacious. He has organizational skills. He is capable of quick determinations, but he is not otherwise tenacious in his convictions and proposals. He is highly ambitious. He holds the conviction that he represents a considerable force in the destiny of Italy, and he is determined to put it into practice. He is a man who will not accept second-level positions. He wants to be first and to dominate. It is certain that, as an adversary, Mussolini, a man of thought and action, an effective and incisive writer, a persuasive and lively orator, could become a leader, a formidable hitter. In the last episode, we tried to give a definition of what fascism was. And we came up with the idea that, to start with, fascism was Benito Mussolini, his actions and the patchwork of ideas he took from various sources. And that it is only with the death of Mussolini in 1945 that we can really start to define what fascism means, because it is after that date that we can call it a defined ideology. Before that, it was just the description of the actions of a man who created something that then perhaps he lost control of. Today we're going to have a look at the life of Benito Mussolini up until 1921, when the Fascist Party was created 100 years ago. As always, I am joined by Matteo Marconi for this discussion. So, Matteo, we could say that from the very start, Mussolini was sort of destined for something, because starting with his father, Alessandro, things were already, let's say, unusual. He was a socialist, a convinced socialist, and indeed he gave his son Benito 3 names. We know it was Benito Amilcare Andrea Mussolini. Benito for Benito Juarez, a Mexican revolutionary. Amilcare for Amilcare Cipriani, and Andrea for Andrea Costa. 3 people who were definitely not right-wing, Matteo, I would say. So
No,
from the very start, we see a socialist family.
A lefty family. His father was a blacksmith. His names were related to a Mexican revolutionary, and Andrea and Amilcare was 2 members of the Socialist Party, and but in the ideals of socialism in that period and in that place, which is Romagna, uh, there was a strong belief in Republican ideals. Republican Party was a very important nationalist party who fought for independence of Italy in the late 19.
Yeah, so we know that Mussolini was born 29th of July, 1883. So we're talking, yes, late 19th century.
19th century, and in that place there were very strong ideas for the independence of Italy, and his father was a socialist, but he was a follower of Mazzini, Giuseppe Mazzini, who fought from the late 1850, okay,
1850s, yeah,
for the independence of Italy in when Italy was not a nation.
Yeah. So a member of the Risorgimento, which is the movement that created the unification of Italy.
Towards an Italian identity. And so in the beginning of the life of Mussolini, we have two different, quite strange ideals. Socialist, which is internationalist, and republicanism, Italian republicanism, which is a nationalist movement.
So from this very stark contrast in the family.
There was a bipolar from the beginning of his life.
Bipolar to start with, okay.
In Italy, we have this strange connection between some kind of left party and nationalist. The Republican Party in Romagna, in which he was born, was very anti-clerical.
Strongly anti-clerical. And indeed, we know that Mussolini had a very strong anti-clerical upbringing, despite the fact that his mother was very religious. But Mussolini was, at a certain point, he was a very difficult child, quite a violent child, always getting in fights, always getting in trouble. And so his anti-clericalism started early because he was sent to a Catholic school. And in this Catholic school, they would divide the students according to their social level. So according to your social level, when you went to lunch, you would be divided among the richer class, the middle class, or the poor class. And Mussolini resented very, very much being put in the poorer class and seeing this social division in action at a very young age as well.
Yes, in the beginning, he suffered from this some kind of segregation.
Yeah, absolutely.
His life began with frustration at the beginning because he felt that he was torn apart from the other people, and I think he suffered from the beginning of this exclusion, and he had this strange family in which his mother was a
devout Catholic, and his
and her father was
a devout socialist,
anti-clerical,
a very, very anti-religious, anti-clerical figure.
In fact, along his life, you will see this kind of a contradiction in his life, in which in some way prevails the movement toward Catholicism, and the ideas of anti-clericalism just in the beginning, and in some way he chose what he needed, moving towards power.
Yeah, exactly. Again, as we mentioned last time, the objective was to reach power and to maintain power, basically. So, difficult childhood, or let's say, in a certain sense, a violent child, difficult child. At a certain point, he does manage to graduate. He is educated as a teacher, as an elementary school teacher, although at the beginning he has trouble finding work. And in the end, to avoid his military service, he escapes to Switzerland, and there he lives in often difficult situations, sometimes also as a homeless person, sleeping out under bridges.
A refugee. He was a refugee.
As a refugee in a certain sense. Although here he starts his activism with the Socialist Party in his Swiss exile, let's say.
He began to take public speeches with Italian workers, socialist workers, in which he had so strong speech against religion, and in a very famous episode.
Yeah.
He asked God to.
Yeah, he said, if God exists, he will strike me down now.
And God
didn't strike him down. Everything could have been better.
The good occasion, it was the right time.
If the Almighty had been listening in that moment, things could have gone a lot differently.
And he went to jail because he had documents.
He had false documents.
He had false documents for some trouble. He had fights, and he was a felon. He was a convicted felon.
Yeah. That's one thing we must know, that during his lifetime, Mussolini did spend time in prison, both in Switzerland and in Italy. But we were saying in Switzerland, he started, in a certain sense, as you were saying, Matteo, his political career, or his career, let's say, as a public figure, and started to show some of his oratory skills, giving these speeches. He learned French while in Switzerland. German, which allowed him then, when he returned to Italy, to teach French as well as a profession.
Yes, and he began to write in newspapers, in local newspapers.
He started his activity as a journalist.
And he was quite skillful as a journalist, because there are lots of books you can find here in Italy, which of Dante Alighieri or Boccaccio, which the preface is written by Mussolini.
So editions of Boccaccio and Dante with the
Dante
preface by
and Machiavelli.
Uh-huh.
I have a book of Machiavelli printed in the 20s, and which preface was written by Mussolini. He was quite.
He's quite a good writer.
Yes.
Quite a good writer. At a certain point, he returns to Italy after his Swiss exile. He manages to find teaching jobs, also in our little province of Reggio Emilia.
Yes,
for a time.
Gualtieri, near us, 20 kilometers from here.
From here, in a little town called Gualtieri. And then one thing we need to look at is his position on the war. So 1911, we have the war in Libya. So at first, Mussolini comes out as, I don't want to say a pacifist, but an anti-war. He comes out with an anti-war position.
Yes, he thought that the war in Libya, which was made to create an empire for Italy, was a sort of imperialist war. He opposed very much this kind of choice. And it was a very strong position against war, and he spoke in public lots of time, and he wrote lots of articles against this choice that brought to war in 1911 in Libya, which was the first war in which we used air bombing. Mm-hmm, the Italians created this beautiful thing.
Yes. Bombing campaigns on those very
dangerous
civilian Ethiopians. Yes.
No, Libyans.
On those very, very dangerous Libyans. Yes, exactly.
Terror bombing, strategical bombing.
Yeah.
Now we call it strategical bombing.
Yes,
but it was just to terrify the population.
Exactly. Yeah. So in this early period, he also has his first experiences as a political leader in Trento, for example. He starts to approach the Socialist Party, and it's also in this period that he starts to write for an important socialist newspaper, the Avanti.
And then in Trento, it's very important is activity in Trento because Trento was in the Austro-Hungaric Empire,
Hmm.
and in Trento, which is Italian culturally, he fought for the return of Trento, which is an Italian city, Italian culturally speaking, to Italy. And so we just in the beginning we have another example of his double face personality, internationalism and anti-capitalistic positions against war. And then we have nationalism for the return of Trento to the fatherland. So we have these two different stream of thoughts in Mussolini's life, which flows together.
Then Matteo, with the arrival of the First World War, Mussolini's position changes. He had spoken against the intervention in Libya in 1911 and initially had been against Italian intervention in the First World War, in line with the main socialist line, but at a certain point he changes his mind and he becomes in favor of the Italian intervention in the First World War. And that changes Mussolini's direction very much because that is when he is forced out of the socialist newspaper, the Avanti. He founds his own newspaper, Popolo d'Italia, and Mussolini goes to war. Unlike other leaders, let's say, Mussolini did fight in the First World War. He was a corporal. He was wounded on the front, so he added this heroic side to his personal story.
A very important medal for a political leader. And this change, but it's quite strange because the change was quite quick. Some people say now in the historical studies, now there are documents that prove that he'd been founded by French and England
So by
to
French
change
and English sources
so
to change
to
his
change his
position.
position because they knew he had lots of power, he has
A lot of
people
influence.
influence, and this kind of change was so abrupt, and so we know that this man always thought about his own power. The ideals were changing, but his one idea was very strong. He had to rule. He had to find his way
He had to
to the
reach
political
power.
power. And so when it was very useful to sustain war, it passed the other
Yeah, when it
side.
was personally and financially to his advantage to change position in favor of Italian intervention, he quite quickly changed.
And there was in the Italian left party, there was in socialist party, there was some people that sustained war against Austria and Germans. So a minority, it was a minority, but quite influence.
And we can say that in the national life of Italy and in the personal life of Benito Mussolini, the First World War is a very important moment because it, thanks also to the narrative told by an important Italian poet, Gabriele D'Annunzio, the First World War brought us the concept of the vittoria mutilata, the mutilated victory, that saw Italy as a winning partner of the war, but not getting all of the necessary advantages from that war.
Yes, because D'Annunzio thought, when he said Vittoria mutilated victory, thought about Nike di Samotracia, which is a Greek statue,
Whose head is cut off.
and so it's a beautiful statue, but there's something missing.
It's missing its head. Yeah.
Italy won
The Nike statue, the Nike statue.
won the first World War in una inutile strage.
Yeah, it was a useless massacre. Yeah.
But he didn't get what they expected to have from
Also,
this
for a
victory.
great inability of the Italian political establishment at the negotiation table. It seems that, for example, the king Vittorio Emanuele didn't even speak good English, so you didn't actually know what was going on a lot of the time at
And
the
when
negotiations.
they went to, I think, London to negotiate,
Yeah, the Italian representatives were humiliated.
so they were put aside. And so this kind of revenge or sort of sorrow for what was happening became one of the strongest ideas of the new.
Of new fascism, because then one thing that we need to point out is many of the early fascists, many of the members of the fasci di combattimento, the combat faces, were so military First World War veterans who were frustrated and disappointed by the results of the First World War. You know, they felt they had suffered and fought and shed blood for a cause, but it was then betrayed.
Yes, and thousands of people fought the First World War, and that was the main part of the first fascist movement, because they were always sustained by Mussolini, who was one of them.
Exactly, he
Fought.
was one of the veterans. Yeah.
Yes, he was a veteran. So the First World War, it's and let's see, the frustration of these veterans was the rise,
There's the spark
the spark that
gave rise to the early fascist movement.
one of the most important things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Without the disappointment of the First World War veterans, perhaps the early fascist movement wouldn't have gained all of that momentum that it did gain in the end. So,
La Marcia su Roma,
the March on Rome.
Rome was formed by veterans, most of all, and so did the soldiers that were in Rome to stop them. Couldn't move a hand against their companions.
Yeah. Or I mean, also there, the king refused.
The king refused, but
to ratify
the army that was on the place, they saw.
They saw their comrades, their ex-comrades, and so we don't know what would have happened if the king had accepted to fire upon the fascists who were marching on Rome. But we will talk about the March on Rome in a later episode. So we have the post-war period, and we have the famous event of the Presa di Fiume, the taking of Fiume. We will dedicate an episode to Gabriele D'Annunzio and the whole Fiume affair. But that, Matteo, just in passing, is another example of Mussolini waiting to see how events unfold and then reacting consequently.
D'Annunzio invaded Fiume, which was which was not Italy, was not was under the Yugoslavia.
Yeah, it was assigned to Yugoslavia in the post-war negotiations.
Yeah, in the post-war negotiations, he decided to move with his comrades to Fiume and took power against this city, and for almost a year. He ruled this as a
not knowing what to do.
A particular Italian republic. He wanted to return that Fiume return to Italy, and Mussolini looked at the beginning. He looked what was happening. When D'Annunzio became very dangerous for international
yes, for the geopolitical balances.
He left him to his
to his fate.
To his fate.
He didn't jump on the bandwagon in that case.
And it's an example of what Mussolini was. He decided something, and other things he looked what was happening. When things were
in his favor, he would jump on the bandwagon.
When something went wrong, he went away.
Like the March on Rome, and we'll talk about the March on Rome, because it seemed that Mussolini supposedly was there in the middle of the march, but he was sitting back in Milan waiting to see what would happen. But anyway, we'll talk about that. So we said the taking of Fiume by D'Annunzio, another example of Mussolini's let's see how things go, let's sit and wait attitude, but at the same time, he had already become a very influential figure in Italian politics, and if we go to 1919, we see the first foundations of these fasci di combattimento, although already before that they had started to appear, let's say. What are these early fasci di combattimento, Matteo?
The first public representation of fasci di combattimento was in Milan in 1919, in Piazza San Sepolcro, when Mussolini, with I think 80, 100 people, he collected these veterans and these some people gained from industrial power, and some merchants, entrepreneurs. He gained these people in this place in some Piazza San Sepolcro, and it tried to expose his ideals.
Yeah, he started to set out his ideas.
And in that period, the danger for industry or entrepreneurs or merchants was the red danger.
Yeah, the Red Scare,
The Red Scare,
the possible Bolshevik drift
drift,
of
because
Italy.
it's real. There was lots of strikes in Italy.
There were a lot of strikes, a lot of
and
violence in the factories,
in
a
the
lot of
fact,
violence in
because there was really a movement
a strong far left wing movement
that looked at the Russian Revolution as a goal,
as
a
an
goal.
goal, as an example to follow.
Example. I don't know. Maybe in Italy it was not possible to reach the same goal. I hope so. But the people were upset. The workers were exploited. There was a very real problem for work in Italy, and so Mussolini knew that that was the right time
That
to
he could play on the fears of the industrial elite for this sort of Bolshevik drift a potential Bolshevik drift of Italian politics.
So it's quite strange, because the man that in the beginning of his political career was a supporter of a revolutionary movement against the
more moderate, yeah, we must
more
remember that
moderate-
Mussolini
was the left wing of
he wanted a more revolutionary socialist movement against the more moderate
against the industry, the capitalism in the beginning. So in the beginning, he wanted to be. He was a revolutionary from a lefty revolution. In that time,
So we're talking no more than 5 years later.
he began the supporter of the industrial
elite
against
this,
the red danger.
Yes, the Red
The-
Scare and this
at-
Bolshevik.
A complete change of. So we know
180-degree turn. 180-degree turn.
this is Mussolini, a man who can turn everything upside down. He can change his mind every time he need it, and it comes from a revolutionary socialist to a nationalist right-wing politician. This is Mussolini. This is fascism. And fascism has something of revolutionary and something of
Establishment. Yeah, it's a mix of revolutionary establishment in this strange bipolar mix that
Yes,
we've
the
mentioned.
bipolar mixed.
And in this bipolar mix, it's interesting because we start to have this image of an enemy which is at the same time totally useless, totally inadequate, the scum of the earth, but omnipotent at the same time. And so you wonder how these two things can come together. So, foundation of the Fasci di Combattimento, 1919, and that brings us to the 20s. The fascists participate in the first election without any success at all, but then, exactly 100 years ago, May 1921, we had the first election in which the fascists enter into parliament with 35 delegates. It's an election which sees a great success of the Socialist Party, who have over 130 delegates, but we do see the Fascist Party or the fascist representatives actually enter into parliament in 1921.
Yes, they enter in a democratic regime, democratic system, and they behave as deputies. No, deputies
as members of parliament.
Members of parliament, and in the beginning, and they were supported by Catholic and liberals, and there was
so all the forces who feared this left-wing drift of Italian politics.
So they thought that fascism was a sort of war against this danger. In the beginning, they have been supported by the democratic parties in the parliament.
Who underestimated the danger.
This is the first mistake.
Yeah.
Because the beginning was quite clear. The man was well known. His history was well known.
So they should have known better.
I think it was all clear from the beginning.
And so that sets us up. Next time we'll go back a bit and talk about D'Annunzio and the Impresa di Fiume, the taking of Fiume. And after that, we will take a look not only at Mussolini, because it is absolutely true, as we said, that in a certain sense at the beginning, fascism was Mussolini and Mussolini was fascism. But he didn't do it alone. So we will be taking a look at some other important members of the fascist movement before we get into the foundation of the fascist party and then see how it took power and then consolidated that power. Thank you for listening to our second episode of the Fascism 100 miniseries. Fascism 100 is researched and recorded by Matteo Marconi and by me, Mike Corradi. Music is by Fabio Debbi. Look him up on his YouTube channel. Thank you very much again for listening, and until next time, keep on resisting.
Sentire Media.
Hey, podcast producers and show hosts. Do you want to join a podcast network that celebrates all things Italian? At Sentire Media, we understand the allure of Italy and its unique culture. Our devoted team of hosts and producers are all driven by their shared passion for Italy. And we work tirelessly to create the best lifestyle podcasts and content that will whisk you away to the very heart of Italy. With us, you can savor the mouth-watering flavors, get lost in the stories from the past, break down the cultural barriers, and truly immerse yourself in the vibrant traditions of this intoxicating country. If you have a great podcast idea or are already in production and would like to join Sentire Media, head over to sentiremedia.com, that's SENTIRE media.com, and find out how to submit your show.